The Acolyte, go!
Oh, go! Oh boy, am I excited. We got a trailer for the next live action Star Wars series called The Acolyte. And goo, lightsabers, mystery. That's all I really want out of Star Wars, and that looks like what we're gonna get here. But I'm mainly stoked about this, goo, because every other quote unquote new Star Wars story we've gotten has had to fit into a very specific timeline. They have almost exclusively taken place between Revenge of the Sith and A New Hope, and or between Return of the Jedi and Force Awakens, or you end up pigeonholed like the Clone Wars. This goo is set roughly 100 years before the Phantom Menace, so they have an entirely open sandbox they can play in here. It's coming roughly at the end of the High Republic era in Star Wars, which is an era where the Jedi and like politics don't necessarily jive the way they do in the prequels. Um, this is really interesting too because with Phantom Menace in mind, which is what we're going to be talking about today, I think there's a good chance this tells the story of how the Sith kind of came back and re-rose up to prominence, as we'll talk about in a few here. They talk about how the Sith haven't been around in a millennia in Phantom Menace. So I'm really excited to see where they take this, and it'll be new characters, new stories. This comes out June 4th, but I'm all jazzed up for it.
One goo, three, yeah! Goo! Jaws 3! Goo! King of Queens! Goo! Meryl Streep! Goo! Entertainment!
I'm Goo.
And I'm Mac.
Just kidding, guys. I'm not old Obi-Wan Kenobi. I am Goo.
Wow, look at that.
Yeah.
Look at that. I mean, that's movie quality right there.
I know it is. It's actually, I didn't even get this from Geroge Lucas. The other Billy D made it for me.
Are you saying Industrial Light and Magic did not create that mask there?
No, this actually goes with our joke from the Obi-Wan show of it'd be funny if he's like, oh, he just pulls a mask down at the end. I look like this now.
Goo!
Yeah.
Today we are discussing, I would say, and correct me if I'm wrong here, the most anticipated movie of all time.
I will agree with you, and I will point out some of the specifics at the end of why it might have been and how some people might have thrown some money at it that maybe they didn't need to throw money at it. It's just a name that people were going to flock to anyways. And I also want to, what is the opposite of patting yourself on the back?
It's a great question. Although, Goo, I say the most anticipated movie of all time, and then it didn't break any records at the box office. So maybe that's too strong of a term. We are discussing Star Wars Episode 1, The Phantom Menace, as it was 25 years this past weekend of it hitting theaters.
Well, actually 25 years and a couple weeks of it hitting theaters. They just put it out this past week for May the 4th.
Fair enough. That's right. It did debut May 19th, 1999. Goo and I were 10 years old at the time. Goo, this movie had a budget of 115 million, which would probably translate to like 230 today, probably double that, I'm guessing, which honestly isn't that bad considering all the technology, new technology that went into making the movie.
So let me also explain why I'm going to unpat myself on the back. Is the other day I said to you, thinking it was kind of clever, like, hey, they're going to re-release The Phantom Menace. It's 25 years. Maybe we should talk about that. Thinking that no one else was going to do it.
Mm-hmm.
Nope. That's all anyone talked about over the weekend. So we are Johnny come last.
Well, I mean, they did re-release it in theaters, so
yeah,
the topic was a buzz, you know.
Made some money.
Goo, the opening weekend for Star Wars, The Phantom Menace, 64 million, just under 64,820,000, just under 65. If you were to translate that to today's money, anywhere between 115 to 120 million. A massive, massive opening, but didn't set a record then. The record then was Jurassic Park: The Lost World at 75 million, so it fell about 10 million short, which is stunning, to be honest with you, that the Jurassic Park sequel would make more money opening weekend than the first Star Wars movie in 16 years.
But you also need to look at the fact that this movie played a huge role in Meet Joe Black reaching $45 million at the box office. This was a trailer that played ahead of Meet Joe Black. And since the internet was not as common as it is nowadays,
Mm.
people would buy tickets to see Meet Joe Black, watch the trailer for the Phantom Menace, and then leave.
Yeah, honestly, a great idea, great call, which is why it's sort of stunning again that it didn't break the record at the time. But I like to me, it's like obviously there was a lot of anticipation for The Lost World, being that Jurassic Park is one of the greatest movies ever. I
Mhm.
just don't know why someone would be more excited for that over, say, the new Star Wars movie. Maybe Jurassic Park appeals to a wider audience. Would you say that?
I think so. I think dinosaurs appeal to everybody. Star Wars, I still think some people kind of, turn their nose at it.
Yeah, that's a good point. Goo, the current record holder for opening weekend money, if you could have guessed it, is Avengers Endgame at $357 million.
A lot
That
of
is
money.
fucking insane. And I'll tell you what, Goo, that record's probably going to stand until the end of time because that was a perfect storm there, a perfect recipe. The anticipation, the 11 years, 10 years of building in the MCU, also that hit just before COVID, just before streaming really, really took over. So I don't know if we'll ever see a movie even get within 100 million of that.
Yeah, and I'm not sure if George Lucas ever went to the box office people and he said, "Hey, can I get that 45 million? Meet Joe Black. I'm kind of the reason why." That's
Dude,
my George Lucas
yeah,
impression, by the way. It's pretty good.
it was really terrible. Worldwide, The Phantom Menace went on to make 924 million. With a couple of re-releases since, it has gone over a billion, just over a billion. And its original domestic run, Goo, 431 million. That's now up to 480 million. 22nd all time. Your number 6 PG movie of all time, which is an interesting little caveat there.
Well, that was the whole thing here is PG, and maybe we can talk about this more in a second, but I feel like whoever was going for that PG rating was too hard and fast on that because that's what the original trilogy was rated and they want to keep it the same. But the rating system had changed since those movies. We had since gotten PG-13. Like back in 1982, Poltergeist was rated PG
Hmm.
because there was only R and PG, and they said, this is close enough. So I think, and by the way, Revenge of the Sith was the first Star Wars movie to have a PG-13. I think if they went a little bit darker and a little bit more towards that from the beginning, might have helped out.
Yeah, I agree. Especially when you have a villain in the shape and form of Darth Maul. It's really hard to
Just when your villain is the devil.
Yeah, it's hard to make him cool when it's PG. Goo, to your point about the re-release this weekend and everyone going to see it, it made 8.1 million, which isn't a ton, but it was second at the box office. So that
Yeah.
says something. It finished second, even up against new movies. So there's still a thirst for Star Wars, even the bad Star Wars.
Are we in the Phantomassance right now?
Goo,
Yeah.
Star Wars Episode 1, The Phantom Menace, of course, is a rated PG. It has a runtime of 136 minutes. That's 2
That's
hours
too
and
long.
16 minutes.
Too
And
long.
there's a moment in here upon the rewatch where I was like, the last 30, 40 minutes of what I just watched was terrible. And so
Yes.
that tells you they can cut at least half that off, right? At least 20 minutes off, if not more, or go longer. One of the two.
Give me the Topher Grace cut, where he took the 3 prequel movies, cut it into one coherent movie, and I think that would have done it.
Yeah, you might be right about that. Goo, this is an action, adventure, fantasy, and sci-fi. On Roddy T's, Goo, 52% from the critics, 59% from the audience. And that seems actually very apt, very accurate for me. I think that makes a lot of sense. On Metacritic of 51, again, that makes sense to me. If you want to compare this to the other 2 prequels, Attack of the Clones, which in my mind is definitively the worst Star Wars movie, 65% and 56%. So higher for the critics, lower for the audience, which blows my mind that people came away from that movie after already watching The Phantom Menace and liked it more. It just doesn't make sense. Sith got 79% from the critics, 66% from the audience. So obviously still didn't do all that well. Revenge of the Sith, though, 68 on Metacritic is pretty good for
I
a
like
Star
Sith.
Wars movie. Yeah, it's mostly good. That movie
And
is
actually,
mostly
Dork
good.
asked the question on X the other day of what is the most, besides the original trilogy, the most rewatchable of all the other Star Wars movies.
Mhm.
And while I think Rogue One is the best of the bunch, Sith might be the most watchable.
Yeah, I think people were misconstruing that. I might say Rogue One is the best of the non-original 3. I think Force Awakens and Revenge of the Sith are much more rewatchable than Rogue One is.
Okay.
Goo, this movie is written and directed by Geroge Lucas. No other writer credited here, and that's certainly an issue with this movie and really this trilogy overall. You have your hand raised,
So,
Goo. What do you
yes, I watched 20 minutes of the behind the scenes documentary of this movie. I forget what it's called. It's on YouTube right now. Just search Phantom Menace documentary. I watched 20 minutes because I got
About an
the
hour
gist of it.
long, right?
Yes, I got the gist of it after the 20 minutes. Geroge Lucas, and I'm not going to fault him for this, might have had too many hands in the pot.
Well, not enough. Well, not enough
No,
of
I'm
other
saying-
people's hands.
Oh, like the percentage of hands is just his hands, is what I'm saying.
He had so much hand.
No, like every one of the behind the scenes is him talking to someone, him figuring something out, him with an idea, him watching Ewan McGreggor get his hair cut. There's almost you needed someone else in there to kind of be like, well, maybe we should do something else.
To be fair,
Yes.
this is 16 years after Return of the Jedi, and there has been fan fiction and books written in between, but he's the only one that knew what this trilogy was going to be. And he also sort of deserved that rope that he hung himself with because of the original trilogy. So again, in hindsight, certainly he needed more help than what he got, or he needed a no guy. But I think he sort of deserved to have a crack at doing it on his own.
Because I'll tell you right now, this movie, lots of big swings, and some of it, they're really good ideas. Some of the other stuff really bogs it down.
Yep, totally agree. And if you look back to the original trilogy, he did write and direct the original Star Wars: A New Hope. And then the second and third movies were co-written with Lawrence Kasdan. And Lawrence Kasdan, of course, is beloved by most Star Wars fans. He obviously had a huge impact in maybe helping George shape his ideas into something that was more palatable for people. And then this trilogy, Goo, in the second movie, Attack of the Clones, he brought on Jonathan Hales. And then he was the solo writer on the third one. So it seems like Jonathan Hales might be the worst writer of all time. So that's a tough look for Hales. But again, like I know Geroge Lucas needed someone to say no to him here, but it's hard looking back on it to like install that, knowing what we had known then.
But also knowing like the notes that I have at the bottom here of like all of the planning that he was doing with the merchandising, he had his hands in too many parts.
Yeah, no, that's fair. That's definitely fair. Aside from movie and writing sort of duties. Goo, synopsis of Phantom Menace. 2 Jedi escape a hostile blockade to find allies and come across a young boy who may bring balance to the Force, but the long dormant Sith resurface to claim their original glory. That's not bad. That's not bad. I kind of like that, actually. This movie stars Liam Neeson as Qui-Gon Jinn.
He is great in this movie.
Fantastic. Incredible.
He's so good in this movie. And especially when you look at him opposite tennis balls and children, he's doing a great job.
Oh, for sure. And we can say that about 90% of this cast. There's just 2 that really stand out. I think one is not even the acting, it's the way the character was written. Ewan McGregor as Obi-Wan Kenobi. Again, phenomenally cast.
I think he's fine in this one, though. I think he gets better as the prequels go along.
Oh, I really like him in this because
but I think he gets better, though.
He plays that boyish charm so well, and by the end he has transformed into the character we know going forward. But it was nice seeing the 2 sides of Obi-Wan in this. Natalie Portman as Queen Amidala / Padme. Goo, she was 16 when they started filming this movie, 16, 17. She's unbelievable in this. She might be the best part of this whole movie.
Also, opposite tennis ball and children. Good job.
Speaking of children, a child named Jake Lloyd was cast as young Anakin Skywalker. And I'll say this, and I said this to you last week before we watched. He's not good. I don't think he lampoons this movie. I think
we're not allowed to say bad things anymore. I will say that his dialogue, the stuff that is written for him, not great. Also, if you watch that behind the scenes, they show 3 children in like the final auditions for this character. One of the kids that is not taken is really good at just delivering lines and putting no emphasis on anything. Whereas Jake Lloyd was trying to put a little spunk on.
More
They should have
personality.
just went with the other kid.
Yeah, fair enough. Ian McDermott as Senator Palpatine. He was originally cast in Return of the Jedi. They later retcon him into Empire. He's incredible as Senator
Ready for this?
Palpatine in the Emperor.
If the shoe fits.
He's so good. He's so
Yeah.
good at being a son of a bitch.
Mhm.
Son of a bitch. Dude, 3 people they introduced in this movie for better or worse. Ahmad Best does the mocap for Jar Jar Binks. I will say I'm glad
The voice as well.
I don't think he did the voice.
I thought he did the voice.
I
Do the voice.
I don't think he did the voice. I could be wrong.
You can
about
talk for a second.
that. For better or worse, he's now getting his flowers. He's been recast in another role. He gets a ton of hate for this character. We can't blame him for this. This was the inception of this character, the idea of this character, and the way it's written, the way it's shown to us via CGI is just bad. To me, the worst thing about this movie by a mile is Jar Jar Binks and everything surrounding Jar Jar Binks. We also get Ray Park as Darth Maul, who is awesomely menacing in the fucking 7 minutes he's on screen. And then we also get Samuel L. Jackson as Mace Windu, who has a very subdued part in this movie and plays a bigger role in the next 2 movies.
I'm saying that he also is the voice of Jar Jar Binks.
Wow, that's not great. I'm sure he was.
He was told what to do.
Told to do that, but that's not great, Goo.
Although George Lucas told him to imagine his arms are just weightless.
We also get Pernilla August as Shmi Skywalker, Anakin's mother. Oliver Ford Davies as Sio Bibble. He's the governor of Naboo. Hugh Qureshi as Captain Panaka. That's Amidala's main protector, the guy in all red with the silly hat.
Mhm.
Anthony Daniels as C-3PO is back in this. He's voiced as he's the C-3PO voice, obviously. Kenny Baker is R2-D2. He's the operator. Frank Oz as Yoda, the voice, which is all
Did
time.
a good job of making it feel younger.
Yeah, spoke a little bit of a lighter tone and a little quicker.
A little
And then,
higher.
Terrence Stamp, who I forgot was in this movie, is in here as Chancellor Valorum or Valorum. Kind of subdued character, especially for Terrence Stamp.
Yep, that's everybody.
Goo. I have summarized the crawl info here. There's no reason to read the whole thing. Essentially, the opening crawl tells us that there is a dispute in a taxation trade route. This taxation trade route is just outside the planet of Naboo, and the Trade Federation has stopped all shipping to Naboo. Because of that, the Chancellor, Valorum, has dispatched 2 Jedi Knights to settle this conflict, and that's where we leap. That's the leaping off point for this movie.
Do you think people that sat through that opening crawl, someone a little bit older, maybe a little more understanding of what's happening, sat in their chair a little bit lower and said, "Oh no"?
To put politics and trades at the forefront like that is disheartening, for sure. You could have certainly made it better, but that is, I think, the genesis of why this prequel trilogy is, I don't know if it's hated anymore, but so disliked, is because they put too much emphasis on just really mundane things, and we simply don't care about trade disputes in Star Wars. I don't know how to say it any better than that.
But also out of that though, the first 11 minutes is pretty Star Warsy. It's pretty good.
Yep, I agree. The first 10-15 I wrote in my notes is pretty watchable for sure.
The only thing that you kind of want to question is the hyper speed, the hyper jump thing that the Jedis do. Oh, that's a new thing. I don't like that.
I never remembered that from past viewings. In this, while they're on that Trade Federation ship, Obi-Wan and Qui-Gon escape those destroyer droids by hyperspace sprinting away to the other end of the hallway. I don't know where the fuck that came from. We've never seen it again in Star Wars. No one talks about that. What the fuck was that, Goo? That was ridiculous.
You thought your stream glitched, right?
It was ridiculous. It was absolutely insane.
Also, this is the only time that we'll mention it here, but the voice choices on the Neimoidians, Watto, and Jar Jar, all a little questionable.
Yeah, the only thing I'll say about that is if you're discussing trades and classes in society, there's certainly going to be certain dialects that are harder to understand than others. Yeah.
Right. And I feel like nowadays if they wanted someone to sound East Asian, they would hire East Asian actors.
Sure, I agree. But what I'll say about those fish, is that what they're called, the Nemoidians?
Yeah.
They're not made to be morons, you know what I mean? So
No.
I don't think it's all that questionable. They certainly have an Asian type of dialect, but they don't make them look dumb, which I think is a big part in
Jar
that whole
Jar?
thing. Yeah,
Or
the
as
Jar Jar thing
or
as
as
well.
Jar Jar sounds like an idiot.
Right, right. So that's a tougher pill to swallow for sure.
All right, like I just said, the first 11 minutes, if you get past the opening crawl, like, you're sitting back being like, I've waited, what is it? What's the years?
16 years.
16 years, and this feels like what I wanted.
Right.
And then the issue here is they introduced Jar Jar Binks.
Yeah, the minute that the two Jedi set foot on Naboo, we're introduced to Jar Jar Binks, and the next maybe 30 or 40 minutes up and through some of the Anakin stuff is really bad, like really terrible, to the point where I made a note of it in my notes about the timeline, specifically saying, "Boy, the last like 35 minutes were fucking terrible."
But also, they could have tested out Jar Jar here and been like, let's see if the people like him. And you have Jar Jar introduce the Jedi to his people, and then they say goodbye to Jar Jar.
Mm.
And then if there was this big uproar of people being like, I want more Jar Jar, much like with Boba Fett, then you bring Jar Jar back. But they said, no. We are going to not double down, not triple down. He is the star of this movie.
In this next, like, let's say 45 minutes post fight on the ship down on Naboo, we get, I think, all of the really bad things in the movie. You have Jar Jar saying "how wooed." He says that once. Oh, there's my thumbs up on screen. Finally, we got that.
Wow,
Annie says "yippee." He says it again later. Jar Jar also says "how wooed" for a second time. We get the speed boost that we mentioned on the ship, actually. When they dive underneath the sea and they're leaving with the Gungan ship, there's a horrible, horrible line from Qui-Gon saying, there's always a bigger fish.
I like this line.
So bad. So bad. And
because there are several bigger fish.
When they walk into Watto's shop for the first time and Annie first lays eyes on Padme, he goes,
"Oh,
are you an angel?" So bad. Terrible.
Have you thought about using that as a pickup line?
And then the last two things, while we're still on Tatooine, we are introduced to the concept of midichlorians, which is back then very confusing. Now it's not confusing. It's just considered dumb. But when it's introduced in the middle of this movie, you're like, wait, what the fuck? They never mentioned this in the original trilogy. That was George needing a no guy.
Because all you needed in that is, why did you bring this kid back? I can feel that the Force is strong with them.
Yeah, you could have done all sorts of stuff other than what George decided to go with.
Science, Yoda. That's what I tell you.
What might be the dumbest line in the whole thing, Goo, is when you get the quick battle right before they're departing Tatooine between Qui-Gon and Maul. Qui-Gon jumps onto the ship and Obi-Wan goes, "What was it?" Talking about Darth Maul. Like that, like what like it was a Pokédex thing. Like what the it was just really, really stupid, really, really dumb.
Now, as someone who has not seen Clone Wars or any of the other animated stuff, I also feel like this is such just not a good bad guy. There was nothing to him in this movie.
So, yeah, they do absolutely nothing to establish him and his motivations, where he come from, what his goal is, because he doesn't speak, and he's also not on screen until like the 40-minute mark.
What made the original trilogy so good?
Mm-hmm.
Darth Vader, fucking best bad guy of all time.
Yeah, and one of my biggest negatives here, Goo, is I have here, Darth Maul's not even one note, he's zero note. There's no notes to his character in this movie, and what he becomes, which obviously it's sort of a retconning, them saving the character later in the Clone Wars, is this quippy, cunty, hell of a badass lightsaber user, Force user. Like, he becomes a truly great character. The problem is they had to do that just to really save or justify his existence in this movie, which is obviously not a great thing. A couple of the things I do like from this movie before we continue to talk bad about it. I thought Natalie Portman as a 16-year-old, 17-year-old playing 14, she was great. I don't know if we should believe she's 14, whatever, she played it well. it's weird in stark contrast to Jake Lloyd. He was only 7 or 8 playing 9 years old. It's weird for them to play up. Usually it's the opposite. We saw, I think the perfect example of this, Goo, is Daniel Radcliffe as Harry Potter. Was like, I don't know, 11 or 12 when they casted him, and then played him 8 through like 18. That's the way they should have done it, especially since Portman was so good. It makes Jake Lloyd look worse. It's just not great. I do like them sort of containing the story to like 1 or 2 planets. We do get a third planet. We're on Naboo, Tatooine for a little bit, Coruscant for a little bit. I think that the scope of that was good. They didn't introduce a million planets in the first movie back in 16 years. I do like our notable characters and what happens. You get Obi-Wan becoming a Jedi Knight as Qui-Gon takes on Anakin. The ships look great. That might be the best thing about the movie. We get an origin for C-3PO. R2-D2 is involved. Like, they do a lot of good things here, but it doesn't save it from the really bad things.
I think the best thing that this movie does is it is so good at world building.
Yeah.
Like, you truly, the first trilogy, the universe still felt pretty small. This movie, you said, they bring up 3, or you go to 3 planets, but you have the Senate, which is just filled with people from all over the universe. You have the Jedi Council, so you have a ton of Jedi there. And the look of all the planets really do make you feel like, oh, this is much bigger than what I remember.
No, that's true. They do a good job making the universe feel bigger without jumping around from planet to planet. I agree with you there.
But also the look of I think that the look of the characters in this movie are very good. The issue sometimes is the way that they're animated don't look real to life, but I like the ideas.
There was a couple times at the beginning of this movie that Naboo and Jar Jar looked really terrible, but by the end of the movie, it either looked better or I was used to it. But for CGI in 1999, it holds up all right.
No, it does look good. The one that I think might look the worst is the commentators for the pod race. The two-headed character.
Yeah.
It just looked like a flat face.
Yeah, no, you're right. And some of that, I think, is them going back and updating it a little bit too. I'm not really sure if I'm sure Lucas tinkered after the fact because he always likes to tinker. Q, I have something I don't know if I stumbled upon this or if I knew it. We haven't talked about it before. The whole premise of this movie is Anakin Skywalker and his journey and how it begins, and him fulfilling this prophecy, being the chosen one, right? Would you agree that's sort of why we make this whole trilogy? So Anakin is the chosen one to bring balance to the Force. We all agree with that. The Jedi believe in this prophecy, at least most of them, from who knows who about this chosen one. But at the same time, at least most of these Jedi believe that the Sith have also been extinct for 1,000 years. So those two ideas can't exist at the same time. It's not possible. It's kind of a massive plot hole. Because why would you believe in this prophecy to bring balance to the Force when there's no need for balance since the Sith are dead? They're old and he's dead and gone. Like they don't exist. So clearly,
isn't it to bring balance to just like the thought of what the Jedi are, though, of like the absolute?
You don't need it.
Oh.
You wouldn't need it in this scenario. Now, clearly, the Sith are alive and well, and clearly not all Jedi would believe either one fully. But when you have one of the main Jedi on the Jedi Council saying that Sith have been assumed dead for a millennia, I don't know why anyone would even continue to tell the story of this prophecy. Like it doesn't make sense that would go on for so long if the Sith have been gone for 1,000 years. It's really dumb. An incredible oversight, I think, on the writing part. It has to be either one. Either the Sith are alive and they're slowly coming back, or you think they're going to come back, so you need the prophecy, or the prophecy doesn't exist.
You know what I didn't like is when Qui-Gon presented Anakin to Yoda, and Yoda's like, too much anger in this kid. Someone should have been like, hey, you sound a little privileged right now, because Anakin was born a slave. There's a reason why he's kind of mad.
Yeah. There's one discussion I actually want to say for spoilers, Goo, and it revolves Anakin's origin.
I'm gonna tell you right now, people know.
No, they don't, because this is going to be something I'm introducing you to. That's why I moved it to spoilers.
The band U2? Ladies and gentlemen, you too.
Q, obviously, outside of mucking it up with intergalactic politics, the two biggest detriments to this movie, in the eyes of most, are Anakin Skywalker, young Annie, and Jar Jar Binks. Where do you stand on both of these characters?
Jar Jar has more screen time, therefore Jar Jar worse.
Okay, that is a fair line in the sand to draw there. I feel like Anakin is Jake Lloyd's like bad, but at the same time, he doesn't distract me all that much. Jar Jar is incredibly distracting.
I'll also say I think the volume of Jake Lloyd's voice is louder than everyone else in the movie, and that is kind of distracting.
It's interesting to note here too that Hayden Christensen doesn't get cast as regular aged Anakin until like a year after this movie came out. So I wonder what that search was like. Since everyone hated Jake Lloyd, they must have been like, really gotta get this right type of thing. And to be honest with you, Hayden Christensen's not great in Attack of the Clones. I think he's very good in Sith. He's not very good in Attack
I think
of the
he's
Clones.
fine in Sith. I think he's better now. I thought he was great in Ahsoka.
He was, yeah.
I felt like everyone started giving him his flowers a little too early, though.
Yeah, probably true. And I think also important to note, he was 19 or 20 when he filmed Attack of the Clones, playing 19. Portman, they're pretty much the same age here, and it made a little more sense. But the older Portman, the younger Jake Lloyd, just didn't feel right too. That was a little off. Goo, this is, if you have nothing to add here, this is fine. This has been a prevailing internet theory for years and years and years. We can't talk about this movie and Jar Jar Binks without mentioning how in the years since the release, why Jar Jar just sort of disappeared from sort of being a central character in this movie to the back of the line in the next two movies. And there's a big conspiracy thinking that there is going to be a massive twist in this trilogy where Jar Jar is working for Palpatine, working for the dark side, or it could even be a Sith Lord, aka Darth Jar Jar. The theory goes because of the way Jar Jar gets in the way that it had to be intentional because it was so bad and so dumb, so over the top. And then when you watch some of his movements, the only characters you see move like that in this universe are Force wielders. They're the only people that can do that shit. And that's just some of the small things behind that support this theory. But if you want to look that up, go on Reddit. There's a million more things about that.
I've seen all this stuff. I think the very simple answer is that the next movies had some more studio interference and people being like, hey, George, we're sorry, less Jar Jar.
Well, part of that, no, that's what I mean. So part of that is, I think George had these grandiose plans for Jar Jar, but Jar Jar was so bad in the first movie, it got scrapped.
No, George wanted to
then they drop, because Goo, if you think about it, Dooku becomes a central character in the second one. He's not even mentioned in this movie. So clearly something happened there where they said, okay, we're getting rid of Jar Jar. Here comes Dooku. Those two are connected for sure.
No, there is nothing connected about it. If you watch that stupid behind the scenes that I've already talked about, Lucas makes a point of saying that this movie hinges on Jar Jar Binks because he is the funniest character that we've ever had. Yes, I am not misquoting there.
I haven't watched that documentary in a while, but I know he's all in on Jar Jar.
He wanted this to be a trilogy of silly, fun, jokey Jar Jar.
Fair enough, but in direct contrast to that, as Ahmad Best, the person we spoke about at the top who voiced and mocapped Jar Jar, who all but confirmed that there were different intentions for Jar Jar's story at the beginning of this trilogy. At least what he had read and what he signed up on.
He can say anything he wants now.
But Goo, the cool part about this, to tie it all together, is on September 13th, and a few months from now, there's a Lego Star Wars release called Rebuild the Galaxy, which is going to be like in the what if world.
It's like a multiverse type of thing.
Yep.
Yeah.
They're going to have a Darth Jar Jar character. So the fact that Star Wars is acknowledging this tells you there's something there. There's a little something there.
I'm also curious if there is a way for them to take Jar Jar out of this movie. Like to get rid of the CGI of him and just take him out. And anytime that someone is either talking to him or, getting dialogue back, they just cut that. And if they can make that into a movie.
Do you want what Planet of the Apes is going to do and then just release the cut with Ahmad Best doing the mocap?
No, because I don't want him in the movie. He feels so out of place.
That's fair. That's very fair. do you want to get to the gauntlet?
Let's get to the gauntlet here, Mac. The fun factor. I don't know. I don't know how much fun I had here because, like I said, I enjoyed the first 10 to 12 minutes. I fucking love pod racing. So, yes, fun with pod. No, I'm completely in on pod racing. I think that the announcers for the pod racing, besides cutting Jar Jar, you cut those two idiots too. But the pod racing scene is great. And then if they found a way for the final battle to not be 32 minutes long with them cutting between 4 different possible scenes and really focus that up, that's also pretty fun.
I would say one of this movie's biggest downfalls in the non-Jar Jar arena is that it's not fun at all. It really lacks fun. It gets caught up in dialogue, and there's not a lot of action outside of the final 30 minutes. And it's just, people always say the prequels feel like Star Wars. Like, oh, yeah, they're not great, but they feel like Star
No,
Wars.
there are parts of this
This
movie that
movie-
does feel like Star Wars.
This movie, for the most part, doesn't feel like Star Wars to me. Like that, it goes out of his way to like, so like when I watch this, it doesn't feel like Star Wars at all, at least this past time, and it goes directly against what the majority of the internet is saying in that respect.
You know what I also hate, and this is such like a stupid nitpick, but the first time that the Jedi reveal their lightsabers is so anticlimactic.
Oh, it's
whereas no. So like they're in a room, they stand up and they open their lightsabers.
no.
But what they should have done is the first time is when they showed the smoke. That should have been the first time that you saw the lightsabers. They flashed them for a quick second ahead of time.
Oh, I didn't remember the quick second. I thought the first time was in the smoke.
The smoke would have been great.
Yeah.
And this is also, I believe, the first time where the lightsabers were more like a light katana and not a big, heavy feeling sword. And that's why they were more.
Well, some of that also becomes in the 16 years after Return of the Jedi and leading up to Phantom Menace. All these books come out, all this fan lore comes out, and you have them diving into lightsaber fighting styles and dueling styles because it's much more telegraphed and heavier looking in the original trilogy for sure.
Also, I want to say this. Maybe the best fun factor actually is watching Ewan McGregor behind the scenes rehearsing his lightsaber battles. He's amazing. He's so good at it.
Dude, I'll tell you, that is the best part, but also simultaneously a bit bittersweet about this trilogy and this movie. The casting they demolished. They got it so right outside of Jake Lloyd, and it sucks that the content we got didn't really deliver with the cast.
Satisfactor. How satisfying is this movie? I think that they didn't focus enough on making these like singularly satisfying movies. And they were like, no, this is a 3-movie thing. It doesn't matter how any of these movies end.
It sucks that there's not like some really fun individual character moments in this. I think they try for it when Anakin and R2 blow up the mothership there, but that's not very satisfying. To me, Duel of Fates saves this movie on a number of levels. It finally gives you what you're looking for in the first Star Wars movie in 16 years. And again, before that, all we got was like 8 seconds between Qui-Gon and Maul, and then Qui-Gon and Obi-Wan demolishing droids. So it was a severe lack of lightsaber shit up until then. But that said, the two deaths, or quote unquote deaths, at the end of the Duel of Fates absolutely blow. They're terrible. So it almost undermines everything that battle is telling us.
Borometer, and this movie is mighty boring for quite some time.
Yeah, the middle half of this movie, not even the middle half. After the first 15 minutes, the next 35 to 45 minutes stinks really bad.
You're not including the pod racing, right?
I am including the pod racing.
Oh, you're so stupid. The pod racing is great.
The pod racing is towards the tail end of that. I'll give you that, but it's...
And granted, hear me out. I'm not sure how much the pod racing fits into this movie. Like, if it was just like its own like separate vignette thing, like if Disney Plus was around at the time and it's like, oh, here's an Anakin side story.
The whole setup there, how Watto doesn't take credits. He only takes this certain amount of money. So now we need Anakin to enter into this race to win the money so we can buy the part from Watto to fix the ship. It's so fucking stupid and convoluted. It's incredibly dumb. And the worst part, actually, I was thinking about it. Obviously, you can have characters in this universe that don't succumb to the Force and Jedi mind tricks. Watto and his species being one, come on. That was just like, oh, wait, we also have to make sure that they can't use Jedi mind tricks.
I love pod racing. You can go eat shit. Halloween, and this is a true Michael Scott vasectomy.
Snip, snap, snip, snap.
Snap, snap. Which way do you go?
Yeah, when I was 10 years old, I really liked this movie. Borderline loved. I don't know if I loved it because I didn't have that fond of a feeling of it, but I definitely really liked this movie and very much looked forward to Attack of the Clones. In the 15 years after that, so let's say 2000 to 2015, shortly before we started this podcast, I learned to hate this movie, and this movie sort of represented everything wrong with the trilogy. But in the 10 years since that, since we've started this trilogy, or this podcast, and have discussed all these movies and have seen a lot of bad movies, I sort of forgive this movie for some things that I hated 10, 15 years ago.
No, I think, like I said, I think the swings that are taken in this movie make me forgive some of the really stupid things.
And is this just because, like, I feel like in 10, 15 years, we're going to look back at a couple of the Marvel movies we didn't care for and remember them more fondly. You're like, you know what? That's not that bad. It's just when you go in with 40 dog expectations, like you would with any Star Wars movie, and it falls well short of that, you double down on how much you didn't like it.
Aquator, is this better or worse than 2017's Aquaman? And I mean, I think that Aquaman actually needs to thank this movie a lot for coming up with a lot of like the CGI and everything else. But I have them roughly the exact same. This is at the equator.
Yeah, this is barely floating for me. Now, ask me in 2 days, it might be sinking a little bit. Ask me in 5 days, it might be a little bit above, might be floating a little bit better. But it's right there. It's right at the equator for me as well.
And the reason why it might be floating for me is Liam Neeson made Plemonade.
Couldn't agree more. Just an A1 example of Plemonade.
And then if we're talking about, if the shoe fits, we're looking at Ian McDermott. We are looking at Sam Jackson, and we are looking at Keira Knightley. Keira Knightley, sneaky great in this.
Keira Knightley has like 4 speaking lines, and you barely even know it's her. You don't even know it's her until 5 years later. Yeah, you don't know it's her until 5 years later because she wasn't a thing in 1999.
Do you know that Bruce Willis is wearing a wig in The Sixth Sense?
Do you know in the second movie, Rose Byrne is in it pretty prominently in the first 30 minutes?
Well, in 3 years, we'll figure that out. So I'm excited. Thank you.
I refuse to acknowledge this part of the Decagon. How about that?
Max Credit Union, and I need to give as much credit as possible to the people who slaved on the special effects for this movie.
I could give it to Ewan McGreggor, but because he's been in so many Star Wars things since and have gotten his flowers, gotten his credit, I got to give it to Natalie Portman. I think she carries a lot of this movie when Qui-Gon's not doing the carrying. And she has to put up with Jake Lloyd in several scenes, and she's still acting her ass off. And she does a pretty good job in the rest of the trilogy. I mean, she's beloved by Star Wars fans. Don't get me wrong. I just don't think we talk about enough how good of a job she does.
Did you rewatch this in the theaters?
No, I was considering it. Schedule changed over the weekend, so I watched it at home and then rolled it in to Attack of the Clones. I watched like the first 45 minutes of Attack of the Clones, and I was scared for a second. The first 15 minutes of Attack of the Clones was kind of fun, and then it got back to what I remembered. There's like 2 one-on-one dates between Anakin and Padme in like the first 45 minutes of that movie. That movie blows.
Pants Tent City, Excite Bike Mania. What got you going in this movie? And the reason why I asked you about going to the theaters is, at least for me, watching it on my phone, the sound mixing and the music is A1. It's great.
I'll tell you what, if
sound effects too.
Yeah, if Star Wars doesn't get anything else right, it's always going to get the sound mixing and everything revolving around sound right. So that lays into my Pants Tent, Goo. And yours, of course, you obviously would echo this. Duel of Fates is maybe the coolest score in all of Star Wars. You have the Imperial March that's up there as well, and a couple other ones. It's just, when Duel of Fates hits, the movie's ramping up. Darth Maul's finally doing some cool shit. It's just like easily the coolest 10 to 15 minutes of this movie, and honestly brings this movie up like 4, maybe 5 dogs for me. Like without the Duel of Fate scene, this movie is pretty hot garbage.
For those of you tardy to the Mac and Goop party, we rate everything on a 40 hot dog rating system in Mac. If you nix Jar Jar, midichlorians, and some Anakin dialogue, give me a more fleshed out villain, because while Maul looks cool, doesn't really do much for me. Baby, you got yourself a stew. I appreciate the world building here and what it tries to do in this movie. The music is amazing. The visuals are sometimes a little hit or miss, but that is of the time. But for the most part, this movie still looks great. And with all the swings, you're going to have some misses. It's just that the misses are a bit much at times. I'm going to go with 24 hot dogs.
Wow. Credit to you, Goo. Where does it rank among the 11 Star Wars movies for you?
I think the only one that I have below it is Attack of the Clones.
All right. Fair enough.
Are we talking shows too?
No, because then you got to include animated stuff too. And
I would say, well, if we're just talking live action shows, I like this more than the Obi-Wan show. I like this more than the Boba Fett show.
That's fair. That is definitely fair on that. I don't even want to start thinking about the shows, but we could include them if you really wanted to.
Hello there.
Goo, the good from this movie. The casting is A+. I'll even forgive them for Jake Lloyd because he's only in one movie. The casting for this trilogy.
Also, I mean, picking a kid, that's got to be tough. Like trying to figure out, like, does this kid have the right moxie?
I'll forgive him for that.
That's got to be tough.
Even like consider the next 2 movies, like Dooku. Who's the gentleman that plays? Is it Christopher McDonald? No. What's the name?
Plumber.
What's the name of the guy that plays Dooku?
Plumber.
Yes, yeah, Christopher Plummer.
I'm not telling you to get a plumber for your house. I'm telling you, plumber.
I don't even know if it's Christopher. Just that's what's sticking out in my mind. He's incredible as Dooku as well. Like I just think they did an incredible job casting, and that probably saves or lifts up this trilogy. Duel of Fates is fucking awesome. The ships and the vehicle design in this movie are incredible. All of the Naboo ships are fucking cool as hell. Like the Royal Starfighter, the Naboo Starfighters, everything around the Naboo ships are super cool. And moreover, it didn't mean much in this movie, but Maul's design that we have now seen in all sorts of properties since is fucking great. Yes, it is apparent that he's the villain. He's the bad guy. I don't care. He looks cool as fuck. Really cool looking villain. The bad Goo. The pacing in the first 2 acts of this movie really hamstrings it. It's all over the place. It's up and down. There's lulls, there's bores, there's a little bit of excitement, but overall not good. Jar Jar, man, he's probably the worst Star Wars character of all time. I'm considering a couple from Rian Johnson's movie, but I think Jar Jar's got to be worse. The midichlorian stuff just really overly complicates something in this universe that we didn't need any more explaining on. We understood that some people can use the Force, some people can't. And of the Force users, some are better. You didn't have to throw numbers at us. That was overkill for sure.
You love stats. Like this is right up your alley. This is like Pokemon stuff.
Qui-Gon's death is horrible. We've seen so many Star Wars characters survive exactly that 10 times over. So that's really disappointing. Maul's death, while him falling down the hole is cool, him allowing Obi-Wan to jump over him and then slice him open in half is so fucking stupid.
It's because he didn't know Obi-Wan could do flips. We've talked this.
Then in 2 movies later, it's the exact same scenario with him. Like that is so dumb. Yep. So dumb. And of course that looks worse now upon rewatch. And then my final real bad thing is...
do you think that Obi-Wan learned from Maul's mistake of like, oh, Maul should have cut me in half when I did a fucking flip over him?
No, Maul just watched...
Yeah, and so when Anakin tried to do that to him, he's like, nah.
No, that would have been instinctual. It makes no sense. And while he's flipping, he doesn't even have the lightsaber because he's recalling Qui-Gon's lightsaber. So he could have sliced him into like 5 pieces.
If you did a flip over me right now, my reaction would not be to slice you in half. I'd be like, fuck, look at this guy flip.
And then the final one, which I've mentioned already, Maul being less than a one-note character is really sucky. It kills him as a villain. And
like I said, I think that if I had the same backstory with the animated stuff that you have, maybe I'd like Maul more.
Oh, Maul becomes other than Ahsoka, arguably the best character in Clone Wars. He's fucking awesome. He's great. And they give him a great backstory too. It's just, he's really good. Go, I've got this right around 24 hot dogs too. I've got it 9th of the 11 movies. To me, there's a clear bottom 2, Attack of the Clones and The Last Jedi. The Last Jedi just, might even do more wrong things than this movie does. It does have better highs probably, but because of where that was set in the middle of a trilogy, as opposed to the beginning, it gets penalized way more. Just above this movie is probably Solo, I might have, but like definitively above it. Like the next tier up, like Solo I like. This movie I can't quite say I like. So this movie is pretty much in a tier of its own when it comes to Star Wars.
Shall we get to spoilers?
Spoilers.
For this 25-year-old movie.
Yeah, so that's why this isn't spoilers, because this is only 5 or 6 years old, specifically here.
Mhm.
A big point in this movie, well, maybe a small point that becomes a big point when people start discussing it in the years afterwards, is Shmi doesn't tell you anything about Anakin's father. There's no allusion to it at all. You have no idea who Anakin's father is, which kind of becomes a point in the overall Star Wars story, because how did he become so powerful? How did he get
That
20,000
sounds
midichlorians?
like a scorned lover, if you're asking me.
Later on, Qui-Gon openly suggests that it was an immaculate conception from midichlorians, which is sort of preposterous, and the Jedi Council just kind of accepts it. Goo, we have a development on this front. It's from 2018, but we don't read books. A lot of our listeners don't read books. And Darth Vader number 25. Now, this is all canon, these Star Wars books that have been created in the last decade or 15 years. It reveals that Palpatine and dark side manipulation is what originally created Anakin. Now, I didn't read far enough into that, whether Shmi was immaculately concepted by Palpatine and dark side manipulation. But if that's the case, does it not make Anakin a Palpatine? Are the Skywalkers Palpatines? It's a very, the waters are really muddied, and I don't care for that. I would have preferred not knowing anything at all instead of them putting Palpatine behind all of that, because it also makes the actions of Palpatine make a little less sense during this trilogy. So I don't care for that.
Just in general, the whole Christ-like thing that we have going on here, I didn't need that.
Fair enough. I'm not going to disagree with you on that. I think the clarification to wait all these years to clarify only that Palpatine used like dark side magic to manipulate midichlorians into creating Anakin is fucking dumb.
I would have preferred if she was like drinking one night.
And
fucking
beyond
Watto.
Well, that's like beyond it. If Shmi feels she was immaculately concepted, she would say that. But it almost implies that she was sleeping around and she just simply didn't know who Anakin's father was.
Watto.
All right, Goo, you want to run through the timeline real quick here?
You can do it. I got nothing.
All right. Qui-Gon and Kenobi are dispatched to settle a trade conflict on Naboo. We get to Naboo. Lord Sidious orders the Trade Federation, the fish guys, to kill the 2 Jedi. That doesn't happen. We meet Jar Jar on Naboo, which again, some pretty groundbreaking CGI for 1999. You got to remember, 4 years prior to this, Toy Story comes out with some groundbreaking CGI. It's really robotic stuff in 95. And 99, they're moving pretty fluidly, and backgrounds, blue screen,
well,
green
let me
screen,
ask you this here, Mac. So this is also, by the way, 1999, one of the greatest movie years of all time. Another movie that came out in 1999 is The Matrix. Which one looks better?
Oh, that's tough, because there's a lot of more singular CGI characters in The Matrix. And if you pause The Matrix at certain points, it looks pretty bad. I think The Matrix is more seamless if you just let it run through. But if you pause it, there's definitely worse screenshots in The Matrix than this movie.
Okay.
The Jedi save Amidala and her crew. They go and or the 2 factions on Naboo are Amidala's people and the Gungans. They leave Naboo to head to Tatooine so they can refuel and fix their ship. This is where we meet a young Anakin who him and his mother are a slave for Watto. Sidious sends Maul after them, dispatches him to Tatooine. Interestingly enough here, Goo, I thought this was something of note, and I don't know why they don't say it, but we don't know Qui-Gon's name until 38 minutes into this movie. They don't mention his name until he is introducing himself to Shmi, which is kind of bizarre for your lead character.
And that is also like what, 10 minutes before. So actually, it is 6 minutes after we first see Maul.
Yeah. Yes. It's a odd choice. On Tatooine, we learn Anakin built C-3PO. We do the whole pod racing thing so they can win the money to fix the ship, which is just a
Yeah.
preposterous like 10 or
Yeah.
12 minutes. They also
Now
show
this
Anakin's
is pod racing.
they show Anakin's two little friends like the whole time
All
during
those kids
Tatooine,
stink.
and they just don't name them. They're just there. That was bizarre.
Ned.
We get the midichlorian count in here. This is also where I put in here the last 30 minutes is absolutely sucked ass, and it was so true.
Nope, pod racing.
Anakin's mother being oddly like relieved for him to go off planet and away from her forever is like really bizarre. Like, even if you feel like he's moving on to a better life, didn't you think there'd be some tears there? As
No.
a parent?
I'm trying to think of like, no, if you're a slave, your kid's a slave, and someone's like, I'll take your kid away from being a slave, you'll probably just be happy about it.
Fair enough.
You'll cry later.
That also leads to my first laugh out loud moment in this movie where Qui-Gon has to explain to Anakin that his mom's just going to remain a slave and everyone's going to be cool with it. C-3PO also gets left behind for us to later find him. Maul's droids track them down. You get that fucking 6-second fight between Maul and Qui-Gon. We head to Coruscant for a quick minute. This is where we meet with the Jedi Council, where we learn the Sith have been supposedly gone for a millennium. Qui-Gon goes to take Anakin on as his Padawan, even though he's quote unquote too old. Yoda doesn't necessarily agree. Obi-Wan is pretty much anointed Jedi Knight, moved on from Padawan during this transition. We head back to Naboo, where there's this whole scheme, this whole plot to get Padme and crew back into the castle so they can strong arm the Trade Federation fish people. This is where we get like the 20 to 30 minutes battle sequence that culminates in Anakin destroying the mothership and the Duel of Fates. Anything else in there you want to talk about?
No, you fucking nailed it.
The biggest thoughts at the end of this movie to sort of set up the next movie and the last two movies in general is Yoda is not for Anakin being trained. And I don't really know why they do this. I think it's important for Yoda to be weary of this. But if you know he's that powerful and now he's on the map of potential Sith Lords, you're better off training him than letting the Sith Lords train him. Are you not?
I also, and now that we kind of talk about this too, is I don't know why, if Yoda knew that Anakin was so strong, why would he put him with the newest Jedi?
Yep.
Why not say,
Yep.
I'm going to take him? Or
I agree.
Sam Jackson's going to take him, or fucking ribbed for her pleasure head over. This guy's going to fucking take him.
Also an issue there. And maybe that's Yoda's way of just begrudgingly letting him train because it's I don't know.
What would have been great is after they say, all right, Obi-Wan, you can take him. And then him and Sam Jackson turn around and start walking away. And Yoda goes, what's the worst that could happen? And then, dun, 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 dun.
They also make a point during this Jedi Council meeting to say that Anakin at 9 years old is far too old to start Jedi training, which really calls into question the whole Luke Skywalker plot.
Nah, it's like playing the piano. You got to start when you're 6.
The coolest thing we get at the end here is Yoda saying, always two there are, a master and an apprentice, speaking about the Sith or their suspected Sith on the horizon. So we go from Maul being number 2 in this to Count Dooku, presumably being number 2 in the second movie, and ultimately that becomes Anakin. But again, part of this Jar Jar theory is how Dooku just gets dropped upon us out of nowhere, not even considered in this movie, which is especially weird considering this is all later stuff that we get, but we learn that that Qui-Gon was Dooku's Padawan. So there's a connection there. He obviously would know all of these people. He would be like suspect number 1 on the Sith radar, which kind of sucks that you can't retcon that, but there's definitely a disconnection between the two movies. I don't know. Again, if you're looking for some cool content, Tales of the Jedi.
Check out Reddit. No. Check out Reddit.
Tales of the Jedi gives you 3 really cool Dooku backstories as well as 3 Ahsoka ones, but it really rounds out Dooku as a character. And then, of course, we finished with the celebration on Naboo, and my prevailing thought of how fucking hard would a post-credit have went in 1999. Like if they teased the second movie after this, especially since it was 3 years between
3 years
movies.
later.
That would have been
What could they
unbelievable.
possibly tease though?
I don't know. Grievous, Dooku, something along the lines like if you saw Grievous at the end of this movie with his fucking four arms and lightsabers, that would have blew your dick off.
I guess it would have had to been a tease for the next bad guy because they really couldn't even tease anything with Anakin.
Yeah, great point. Great point.
Is that your last thought on this
That's
movie?
it. That's it. Yep.
All right, well.
Let's get into Max.
And Mac Zach could be anything it could be about. And Mac, I want to talk about maybe the most fascinating thing about this movie is the marketing. This was just an ambush.
And again, you and I at 10 years old is the exact market demographic they're going for here.
Yep. So I got a lot of this stuff from retrozap.com. They did a great job on one of their articles. A lot of stuff is on Reddit, the toys that made us, the Daily Beast. Also, Mr. Sunday Movie did a great 20-minute rundown of this whole thing, maybe about a year and a half ago. It all starts here in the 1970s, the late 1970s. The original toy line and accessories were done by Kenner after it was passed on by all other toy lines. But with that agreement, because usually movies did not get toy lines, Kenner said that they would take 95% of every dollar made. 20th Century Fox would get 2.5 of all those. And Geroge Lucas would only get 2.5% of all dollars made, so less than a nickel. In 1977, after the first movie came out, they did not have a toy line ready for Christmas, and they actually sold empty boxes with little slips in it saying, in 6 months, you get these action figures.
Which is insane, but that speaks to like the meteoric rise of this was unprecedented. It was the only way I can describe how popular Star Wars is and was it was the Beatles for movies.
Mm-hmm.
It turned movies into something they never were and created this lust for any sort of merch in the same way that people yearned for the Beatles in the 60s.
Okay, so with this agreement, the 95, 2.5, Geroge Lucas hated this. He could not stand it. And one of the stipulations in the contract is, first off, Kenner would have control of everything Star Wars throughout the galaxy unless they did not pay Geroge Lucas $10,000 a year if they did not reach the amount of money that would have gotten Lucas his $10,000. And after Kenner was bought by Hasbro, they forgot to pay Geroge Lucas his $10,000 during the years of darkness between the old trilogy and the new trilogy, where Lucas tried not to sell too much stuff because he was trying to maybe play around and not have them pay him.
Yeah.
Because after he was finally let out of this contract, a year later, he announced the new trilogy, the new prequel trilogy. So huge mistake by Hasbro there. But then after Lucas shopped around, Hasbro got back in with Lucas and gave him 18% of all toy sales, which is fucking insane. And they also made him a majority stakeholder in the company, 7%. I think he was second behind like the CEO of the company. So like they did all they could just to keep him in there. And also it wasn't even a non-exclusive rights deal. So they gave him $400 million with a not exclusive. So he could still shop this around to other people. And he did all of this before a script was even written for this next movie.
Yeah, it's crazy to think about. So I don't know, is it still Hasbro that makes the toys today?
Yes.
So good on them. It obviously worked out. But if you consider what happened in the next decade, 99, 02, 05, like it was tough
We'll get into that.
to sell toys. And then there's this massive gap between 05 and what is it? 15 or 14 that Force Awakens comes out. That kicked it back up. And obviously Clone Wars helped, in the early 2010s, stirring interest back up. But that could have gone to real serious shit.
All right. So Lucas made everything under the sun and had 73 official licensees for this movie. selling stickers, cards, calendars, books, comics, makeup lines, food, toothpaste. He had 2 separate billion-dollar deals, one with Lego, which is still going on to this day. It was actually Lego's first big promotion with a licensed property, and then also with Pepsi. Pepsi produced over 8 billion Star Wars cans throughout their line of sodas. The big thing being gold Yoda cans that if you had those, you can send them back in for $20.
It's funny to think about. I'm thinking about the makeup thing. I don't remember any little girls running around like Princess Amidala. But that said, in 99 or 2000, my cousin Chelsea, who's the same age as us, so it was either in her 5th grade or 6th grade class photo, she did the Princess Leia buns and thought it was going to be the coolest thing ever. And now it's like a laugh out loud memory. But this did kick off new interest in the old trilogy as well. So there is something.
Well, they also re-released the Legends line, I think, in 1995, just before these came out, and they also re-released the original trilogy on VHS in 1997. That's how I had it, Matt.
Same.
That's also when George Lucas put a bunch of weird CGI things in there because he had in his original contract that he could play with the movies as much as he wanted.
This is right around the time. I don't know if they retitled Star Wars to A New Hope then or after Phantom Menace came out. But I had like a decades-long argument with my father saying, no, that movie is called A New Hope. He goes, no, it's just called Star Wars. So maybe it was at some point, but it is currently called A New Hope.
This sounds way off, but Lego product sales went up 500% in 1999. Maybe I'm right. I don't know.
I'm trying to think. It honestly might have, because what IPs did Lego have at that point? It honestly might have skyrocketed.
This was the first one.
Yeah, there you go.
Okay, speaking of food, Taco Bell, KFC, Pizza Hut, they were all in on this.
It's called Goo.
What was that?
Kentucky Hut.
Kentucky Hut.
When you get all 3 as one.
An amazing commercial that I could not pull because there was Star Wars music in it, but all 3 chains teamed up. There was the Chihuahua, there was a Pizza Hut guy, there was the Colonel, and they were all out there looking to take down some droids.
And that all ties into the Pepsi thing, because Pepsi bought all 3 of those companies. So you don't know this?
No, go ahead.
So they were trying to compete with Coca-Cola always and forever. They figured out it was cheaper to just buy up chains and put Pepsi products in there instead of trying to sell Pepsi products to the chains.
So with those companies, we had cup toppers, and it depended on which place you went to, different cup toppers for all of those. There were posters, toys, and Defeat the Dark Side games. Speaking of games, there was an amazing pod racing game on the N64. There was also an RPG on the PlayStation.
I distinctly remember playing that pod racing game way more than I should have. And it's funny. I honestly can't recall if I loved pod racing when I watched the movie, but after the fact, because the game was so fun, and I'm pretty sure they made an arcade game too. It like made you or tricked you into thinking pod racing was cool. I will say the design of the pod racers are fucking cool, with the engines out ahead, and then
big
almost
drums,
almost like a horse-drawn carriage, but with engines. It looks cool.
Giant magazine campaign involving Time, Vogue, GQ, Newsweek, TV Guide, and more. There was a CD released ahead of the movie as well, with songs from the movie. One of the songs on the back of the CD cover there was called Qui-Gon's Noble End.
Bit of a
they
spoiler
spoiled
there,
the movie. I mentioned earlier the trailer that played before Meet Joe Black. It also played before The Waterboy and The Siege. And the New York Times, like I mentioned earlier, said that people would go to those movies, pay the $10 to see the trailer, and leave. You could also watch the trailer by downloading it on the internet. George Lucas also made a deal that it would be exclusively on QuickTime.
Could you imagine back in so it comes out in 99, trailer. So Meet Joe Black was 98, right? First trailer had to have been 98. I'm guessing.
Yeah, somewhere around there.
Or maybe early 99. How long it would take to download like a 2-minute video in 1998 or 1999?
First, you have to download QuickTime.
You got to get QuickTime. You got to make sure if you're
you have to have an Apple first. You have to have an Apple first, then download QuickTime, then download the movie.
Yeah, and if you're on dial-up, you have to, if someone calls, you're fucked. You got to redo the whole thing.
This movie also had the first ever Force Friday, which is when all the toys are launched. Toys R Us had a Midnight Madness where it would first release the Phantom Menace toys, but Lucasfilm had to approve all of the stores, and they would actually go into all the stores ahead of time. And if the toys were out early, they would never be allowed to sell Star Wars merchandise ever again as a part of their rule if they want to play with this right
So
now.
stupid.
But I will also say this: the displays. If you go and type into Google Toys R Us Phantom Menace displays, it's amazing. It's full aisles.
Do you recall your like golden goose, your main or your favorite toy from everything way back when?
Like my favorite Toys R Us toy.
No, from Phantom Menace.
I didn't really get a ton of the toys from Phantom Menace.
I had, and that's all I wanted. My father might went and got it immediately, and this maybe speaks to how stupid the movie is, and maybe how much
Yeah.
potential Maul had. The only thing I wanted was Maul's double-sided lightsaber. I thought it was the coolest fucking thing in the world. But I guess it is sad that coming away from the first Star Wars movie in nearly 2 decades, that I wanted the lightsaber of the bad guy that was in the movie for 3 minutes, and probably wasn't showing up again.
Oh, speaking of this movie being a trendsetter, of course, we get the double-sided lightsaber in this movie. Requiem for a Dream comes out 15 months later.
Fucking it's a copycat league, Goo.
Copycat league, my man. Also, Star Wars had a rule that if you wanted to sell Phantom Menace merch, you had to get rid of all old Star Wars toys. You could not sell any of the old stuff, and they would do much like Disney does with their VHSs, put it in the vault and then re-release it as they want.
Yeah, that's dumb. Because like I said, the example of my cousin falling in love with Princess Leia in the original trilogy was because of Phantom Menace. You know, that comes out, it stirs up interest. They're not competing with each other. They lead to each other. I don't know. That's stupid.
20th Century Fox also spent $50 million in promoting this movie. I don't know why. This movie kind of promoted itself.
But all these outside factors, Goo, and everything surrounding it, doesn't it blow your mind that it was not the biggest opening weekend ever?
It did pretty well, though.
Yeah, but it still fell 10 million short, and 10 million from 65 to 75. So that's more than 10%.
So also, speaking of being a bit of a disappointment, they did sell $2 billion in merch, but the issue is that all of these toy stores were left with way too much toys. And they all ended up in the bargain bin because they couldn't sell them, because they made too many toys.
Well, I also think if the movie was better, you probably would have sold all of those toys.
I feel like, and I think you can agree, is they would have sold, what they sold at the beginning, and I think they would have sold more at Christmas time, maybe, if it was liked. But the whole thing, though, is while it wasn't loved, this movie still sold 100 million VHSs.
It's one of those things, though, where Star Wars fans are collectors. So whether it sucks or not, you have to have it in the collection. You just have to have it.
Then it sold 2.2 million DVDs a year later.
And then that was in the DVDs where Lucas made even more changes to the originals, right? Because there's like a 97 cut, and then there's like an 01 cut or something of the original.
06 maybe? I think he might have redid it when he released Sith, like when the other trilogy was done. Maybe.
Gotcha.
So that's a fun backstory of all the merch. I love it. That's my favorite part of the movie.
After rewatching this movie 25 years later, first of all, when's the last time you watched it from beginning to end?
When did we start the podcast? Because I think I watched
15?
it when we talked with Sideric about it.
15 or I think the fall.
Yeah, so
of
7,
15.
8 years ago. 7, 8 years ago. 9 years ago.
It's 9 years ago. Yeah.
Yeah.
I caught the second half of this movie like a year or two ago, and I came away thinking like this might be better than I thought. And then rewatching it this time, watching the first half along with the second half, I was like, no, this movie's not good. Did you come away liking it more or less than what you had going into it?
More.
I think I might have liked it a little more than I thought I did, because
No, more.
You know what? Because I thought I hated it.
Yes.
And I don't think I hate it anymore. I just think it's not good.
I thought it was more political and dialogue-y than I remembered. And I thought there was more action than I remembered. And pod racing is sweet.
Do yourself a favor and see if you can get through the first hour of Attack of the Clones.
We decided the other day we will watch it in 3 years.
Like I said, first 15, 20 minutes, not bad. The next 30, 40 minutes, unwatchable. It's unwatchable, Goo. It's
And I will either shake my head
unwatchable.
yes or no in 3 years. Where can the folks find us, Mac?
You can find us on Twitter and on Instagram at Mac and Goo Podcast. Every other platform, we're Mac ampersand and Goo. It's Mac Shift 7 Goo. That includes Facebook, Stitcher, TuneIn, Castbox, Spreaker, Google Play, iHeartRadio. We're on Spotify, but more importantly, we're on Apple Podcasts. Get on there, rate, review, subscribe, 5 stars. If you do that, we'll get you a free Mac and Goo t-shirt from the folks over at Watertown Sportswear, watertownsportswear.com, expert screen printing and embroidery.
If you made it to this part of the podcast, send us a GIF of Jar Jar Banks' 3 dicks.
You might have lost them with all your toy stats in there, but
I think the stats are the best part of this podcast. I think the stats are the pod racing of this podcast.
I have been asking you to watch 3 shows for 2 months, and instead you spent your whole weekend on Phantom Menace stats.
Can I tell you what my weekend was?
No, I don't want to hear it.
Between watching the movie, doing research, watching the Geroge Lucas behind the scenes thing, I spent roughly 5 hours on this.
Unbelievable. The whole other episode we could have on any number of shows.
And I watched the Tom Brady
and
roast.
instead yeah, which was 3 hours. There's your 8 hours right there.
We might be doing a dump on Thursday because I don't think I'll have the other stuff
I don't
done.
want to do a dump.
And we're just going to talk about the roast.
The roast was great, by the way. If you have made it to this point and you didn't watch it and you were a fan of roasts, go watch Tom Brady roast.
I will say this though, if they could find a way to edit it down to like 90 to 100 minutes, that'd be even better.
215, I was thinking right around 215 is when I started feeling the length, but you can go to 215 and it's fine.
I think there's a couple acts that you can just clearly cut out. You can cut out a lot of the Kevin Hart interlude
stuff. You could just cut out altogether. I'll tell you what though, there was no straight up. Affleck was maybe the worst of the single ones. There was no straight up bombs though. Nothing really terrible.
Moss said one thing funny, but
you know what? Moss was the worst. Moss was the worst easily. Yeah, you're right. You can cut Moss's thing out altogether.
Moss is one funny line, and they could just have this one line of him going, "Why didn't you want to cheat with me?" And then just cut it right there.
Yeah, it was good, actually. Good point.
Okay. So maybe we'll talk about that on Thursday in our news dump.
Yeah, just watch a show.
And we saw a still of Superman.
Go watch a show. You got nothing else to do.
I have everything to do.
Yeah, fuck Superman.
It took me 2 hours to put my kid to bed tonight. I have a lot of things I have to do.
Show him a show.
I can't get him all hyped up on sugar like that. tpublic.com merch. Go buy something. Catch us at the end of the week. Then we'll have monkeys next Monday. Tuesdays are goose days. I abuse kangaroos.
Bye.
Tim Burton.
Yippee!
Please flip the cassette over to side B to continue the adventure.